Hello, my name is Pilossof, and I'm leading the DevOps group at Wix. And today, we're going to talk about CI/CD and Wix, hoping to share some of the insights we've gathered here for the past decade or so. Let's start by aligning everyone around what CI/CD is. So CI is the initials of continuous integration. This is the process of continuously collecting changes from the developers, code changes, building them and testing them, and validating that they can continue and go to the next step. If a process discovers that the change is invalid, it stops here. But if the process is successful, kind of a package is being created so it can be used for the next step, the CD process. So this is a continuous integration. And then the output from this is the input for the next step, which is the continuous delivery or CD process. This is the process of taking the packaged code into the production environment. Sorry. Some companies use a best practice that says, let's put it as a measure of caution in a staging environment or an integration environment. But we also need the ability to roll back a change. So if I made a change and it's faulty, I want to be able to roll it back as quickly as possible. And this is actually what continuous delivery is. To make it even more clear, we can see this diagram. So on the left-hand side, those are the company developers. And the goal is to deliver code changes, bug fixes, new features, performance improvement, all those things into our end user on the right-hand side. And this is a critical path in the company delivery process that is being built and then deploying and reaches the production environment. Once the code is in the production environment, it's ready for usage from the company customers. So what is DevOps? So DevOps is a set of practices that is developed in the last decade that defines what are the ways to do different things in the process we've just described. So I took the liberty of getting some important terms in here and explain them so you get the understanding of this domain. So an artifact. An artifact is actually the package that we mentioned earlier. This is a way to take a code that is packaged and manage it. So for example, I can do a versioning on an artifact. So if a piece of code was built and it created the package, the output, and now the same piece of code was changed, usually the version is now promoted into a higher version. So the same artifact with a different version. And then I can browse through the history of the artifacts. I can roll back and I can do many, many things with this artifact. Master branch and branching. So usually the code of the company is sitting in a repository. It can be local or it can be cloud service, where all the code stays. Some famous code registers are Git, GitLab, GitHub, and other. And when I'm working with this code as a developer, I can work directly on this master branch where all the code lays, and this is where I'm taking the production changes from. But if I want to work in a more safe way, when I'm doing changes, instead of changing the master branch, I can do a snapshot and go to a side branch where I can change things, experiment them without affecting any other developer in the company. So this is master branch and branching. Fail-fast is a kind of a best practice where it says that as a developer, if I'm doing a faulty change, I want to know about this as quickly as possible. So best would be if I know about this on when I'm writing the code, and second best would be when I'm building it on my local machine, and so on. So as fast as possible is the best that I can, because I'm not wasting time waiting for something to happen which is faulty. So the worst part is that I discover that this change is faulty only after a customer complains about it in production. So now I need to roll back and do a lot of stuff. Mean time to recovery is actually this is what I described. It's a metric of when I discovered something faulty in production, how do I roll it back or change it back to a non-faulty situation? So MTTR is a metric that we can measure to understand that we're keeping this time short and even improving on this. So this is DevOps. And I can say that unfortunately, in some companies, the DevOps domain had become a DevOps team. So what happened is there's developers, R&D, and they are developing their code. And then there's a different team that is responsible for taking this code and making all the process that we've just described, the CI, CD, with all the understanding of how to do it right, and then put it in production. It's one hand, it's very good because we have domain experts for doing this exactly, and they know exactly how to do it. But on the other hand, they are becoming a bottleneck in this critical path, as we mentioned, and also they are taking the responsibility of all this flow from the actual developer who did the change. And that is something we really don't appreciate, because we believe that our developers should own their code beginning to end. So from the time it was written until the time it's running in production against our customers. We think that this is the best way to get accountability. This is how we build our systems at Wix. So this was a good segue to actually what we are doing in Wix. And I want to start by sharing some numbers. So Wix has around 2K developers. Most of them are front-end developers, but we also have a lot of back-end developers. And then we also have different flows like mobile developers, and we also have data developers. They are all using different languages and different tools to build their flows. Those 2,000 developers are generating around 8.4 merges to master. As I mentioned before, we are working in a way of branching, most of us, and merges to master are happening when a code is being tested and verified, and now I want to merge it to the master branch and take it to production. And so this is happening 8.4K times a day. To be fully honest, some of this chunk is being triggered by bots. Those bots are identifying that a change that the developer did is now affecting something else that now needs to be re-triggered and re-merged. And this is generating this very impressive number. So how many builds or CI flows are being triggered in a day? You can see the number, it's around 7K per day. And you can see that we are measuring this all the time. And we also have on the bottom end, we see that we have different mechanisms to actually run these builds. So the blue part is the backend, the orange part is the front end. And as you can see, there's the bluish part on the top, which is our legacy systems that we're trying to make thinner and thinner and remove at the end of the day. So this is something we measure constantly to see that we're providing the best service, and we're always measuring to make sure that our customers, my customers that are Wix developers, are getting the best service that we can. This is the number of distinct deploy services in production. It's pretty huge number. And I just want to mention that those services are more than one instance. So we have multiple instances, minimal of 2 or 3, that are deployed not only in one data center, but in more than one data center. So this is like just the distinct services that we have in Wix. It's pretty large number. This is even more impressive. This is the deployments that we have per minute. So as you can see, in a working day, we have more than one, usually 1.5 deployments per minute. That means, and this is just the morning time, as you can see, this is 6 a.m. So it's going even higher at noon. Every minute we have more than one deployment that is being triggered by one of our developers. This is like the old saying about the river, where you never enter to the same river because the water is always flowing, so it's a changed river. This is Wix. You are never getting the same Wix, because every time you click refresh, you get a change or some kind of change that is being pushed to you. And the beauty of it is you don't feel the same. If you feel it, I didn't do my job. So hopefully you don't feel it. Just as a small fun fact, the oldest service that we have is the first service that Wix actually had. And this is a service that is 12 plus years. Imagine the number of times that this service was changed, because it is 12 plus years deployed, and it is being worked on so many times, and it was deployed so many times. So this is just to understand that we have new services, old services, everything is running on the same production environment. Our challenges, or what are we trying to achieve? So we always want to be fast. As I mentioned the term fail fast earlier, we want to be able to quickly identify whether this change that the developer is doing is a valid one or a faulty one. And then if it's a valid one, we want to, as quickly as possible, make it available to our users, our customers, Wix customers. We want to make sure that this process is reliable. There's no system error, and there's a lot of moving parts in this process. Many moving parts because of the different flows, because of the different languages, because of the different requirements, because of the different location that we are deploying the service, because of the security regulation that requires some of the services to be more secure and some of the services to be with data locality. So many different flows means that we have many moving parts, but still we want to make sure that this process is always reliable and changes are being deployed to production and rollback safely with no user disruption. We also want to make sure that this process is fully secure and no malicious code coming from externally from the company is getting into our production system. And this is the critical path that attackers are now trying to abuse in order to actually intrude companies. And we saw few of those attempts really early this year. If you remember Log4j, and also there was something around NPM packages. There is very strong need in today's environment to secure those external code blocks and make sure it doesn't hurt our production. So these are the main challenges that we see in our pipeline. Some key decisions that we took along the way. We decided that we don't have a staging environment. That means that the code after the CI process is being deployed directly to production. We can talk about how we do it, but the decision was taken because we understood that there's no way we can mimic the production environment in a good way. So we decided to drop it altogether. So developers are pushing the code directly to production, and this sounds scary, but we will talk about how we do it shortly. We also understand that in order to be very advanced and very sophisticated, I want to talk about also some key decisions that we took in Wix that are driven also from the amazing numbers that we saw in scale. So one decision is that we don't have any staging environment. That means that code or changes are being pushed directly into production. This sounds really scary, but we have good ways to actually make sure that those changes are safe. We also want to encourage developers to do things and not be afraid to do changes. And so we have really good mechanisms to experiment. So everything that is being pushed to production can be very closely monitored, and we can open an experiment, close an experiment, and see how it goes, measure it, and decide whether we want to make this publicly available or not. Another key decision that we took is that we don't have any downtime. So any change, whether it is a complex change like upgrading the database or changing the data structure, or just adding a new feature, we're not allowing ourselves to be down. And Wix has 99.98% uptime in the past year, and it also aimed to be increased. And this is a key decision. And I think that every developer at Wix that is preparing for a change is taking this into consideration when he's thinking about how he's going to change it. So we talked about CI and CD, and we talked about DevOps and the challenges and what is Wix approach. So what is DevX? So DevX is a group that I'm leading that is actually responsible to look at all this process as an end-to-end process and provide the best experience for Wix developers when they're doing their code changes. So we want to make sure that everything that goes through this pipe is easily understandable, easily visible. And also, it's very easy to add new flows and change the existing one. This is my amazing team. This was a very hot day in Israel, but we still managed to enjoy ourselves. It's a big team. We are 40 developers or 40 people plus minus. We have our own CTO, product manager, business analyst, and UX experts, and we are spread across 4 countries. All those people are actually working to make sure that this process is as good as possible. So what does it mean? What do we aim for? We want to increase the developer velocity, Wix developer velocity, by removing any points of friction in this process. We also want to make sure that Wix is reducing its operational costs without affecting the efficiency of the process, of course. As I mentioned also, we want to enable innovation. So we must be open for any new flow to be on board. I want to talk a little bit about concrete examples that will make things even more clear regarding how we as DevOps group are working to make the CI/CD process good for Wix developers. And then as a result, the way for our developers to push new features and bug fixes and things like this into production becomes really smooth, and real beneficial is coming to our customers, to Wix customers. So one example is around visualization. So if we want to make sure that our developers, Wix developers, are accountable for the process of taking their code and put it in production, we're enabling this process and making sure that they have the right tools, but we also want to give them the visibility of what's really happening. And this is a snapshot from a futuristic, but really in the making already, of our dev portal, where we can see a deployment process being in progress. So we can see that we have few data centers, and we have our instances number, and we can see that some of them are green, some of them are red, failed, could not deploy, and now the developer knows which action he can do. So this is the kind of how we think about visualizing the process to our developers. We talked also about the fact that we are doing kind of a scary process of taking the code directly from the CI process into production without staging environment. And I want to make sure that you understand how we do it, because I think first, it's pretty cool. Second, it demonstrates how extremely cautious we are when it comes to our customers. So let's dive a little bit into the process of gradual deployment. This is, as I mentioned, being triggered almost twice per minute in the peak time. So how gradual deployment work? First, we have our current version of Artifact that runs in production. Just for as an example, we took a service that has 20 instances that runs in production. We call it a fleet, and each instance called a pod. A pod is actually something that runs in a Kubernetes cluster. So we have this production fleet, and now we want to introduce a new version. So the first step is we do not touch the production fleet. We're just adding a second fleet with 20% from the number of instances that we have on the main fleet. Now we are waiting. not just waiting, we are waiting and measuring. For each fleet, we have its own dashboard that shows all the metrics, business metrics, and also technical metrics like memory usage, consumption of events, I/O, things like this. And we have those two dashboards running side by side. Those dashboards are being constantly measured and compared to make sure that we don't have any degradation in the production performance for the new version that we just introduced. If we decided that everything is safe and everything looks good, we are moving to the next step. On the next step, we're adding a bit more pods to the new version. And so more of the traffic is actually going to the new fleet. And now we're at the stage that we're doing another round of waiting and measuring, because we learned from the past that increasing the traffic may surface some problems that we were not aware of. So we decided to go into the next step because we thought that everything is green. And the next step is just a repetitive step that's doing an additional 10 additional pods. We are reaching 10 pods. That means 50% of the original fleet size. And we're doing another step of waiting, measuring, and comparing. If we did all those steps and we decided that everything looks good, we are now GAing. The new version becomes the current version, and the old version is being rolled back and eventually is not part of the production flow. This is how we do gradual, safe, gradual deployment directly into production. Of course, at any step, if we decide that the comparison is not good enough, we are rolling back the process and nothing is being changed. So the original fleet stays. Employee preview is part of this process because what we described is only relevant for Wix customers. But in order for us to actually get fast feedback, we take any change that is being pushed by the developer and put it as the version that the employee are getting. So the new change is always available, or always the version that the employees, Wix employees, are getting. And since we have like 6,000 employees, and some of them are actually working on our website constantly, like customer care and product managers and even developers, we are able to identify some issues even before they get into the production environment. As I mentioned, we also have a mechanism to identify 0 days attack. So we scan all the files that are being used in our code base, even if they are not created inside of Wix. As I mentioned, very famous example from the last year was the log4j attempt, and also the NPM package scope. And I think that this is to make sure that nothing is being pushed into production which is not secured, fully secured. We also will have a way to make sure that all the latest versions are running actually in production, and we don't have a stale artifact or a stale service. This is because an artifact is combined both from my change, but also from other changes. And in order not to get to a point where someone didn't GA or didn't deploy his code into production for a long time, we're making him, letting him know that we have a process that will take his changes to production, even if he didn't intend to. This keeps also a high level of accountability for all the developers. This is it for me. Hope you learned a little bit from what we're doing to make sure that the process of delivering software to production is fast, is also reliable, and also secured. Thank you, and see you next time.